how did Justin become so good looking and get a remarkable tan? Well, I'm not Justin. Justin's away giving a talk in Scarborough, so I'm filling in his place. But as usual, if there are any people who are new to the center, I have to give his usual spiel that most of us are used to hearing. So if you're new to the center, welcome. If you want to find out more about what the center is about, feel free to ask any of the volunteers. But essentially, as it says on the side, CFI's role is in promoting reason, science, and freedom of inquiry in every area of human endeavor. And that's something we're really committed to, both in our programming and our social services. To become a friend of the center and support CFI, it's very cheap. It's $20 for students, 60 for non-students, which is very reasonable considering the number of events we do, such as Tom Flynn's talk tonight. Among other things, we also have a talk coming up on the 18th by George Dvorsky, who's the president of the Toronto Transhumanists Association, and he'll be talking about the aspects of the modernization of technologies and how they'll be applied to going to something which may be called quote-unquote post-human. So it's a very interesting area to discuss. We also have film screenings such as Flock of Dodos, which is coming up, and 1984, based on the famous book by Orwell. CFI also offers a lot of social services, such as our ESL conversation classes, which usually happen on Mondays, our Seculars for Sobriety, which is essentially a secular version of Alcoholics Anonymous, Coping with Religion, and breakup support groups, all of which you're welcome to take advantage of. So if you want to support us, really take out a membership, and it entitles you to several privileges, including getting into free for all the events, being allowed into the receptions that we have before some of the events, and of course discounts on related books at CFI, such as Tom Flynn's new Encyclopedia, which he'll be talking about. So enough about that. The reason you guys are here today is obviously to see Tom Flynn talk, not me, unfortunately. Maybe some of you are here to see me talk, I don't know, I won't judge. So Tom Flynn is the editor of a little magazine you guys might have heard of called Free Inquiry. It's CFI's flagship magazine. I highly recommend it for those of you who haven't read it. And he's also the director of the Robert Ingersoll Birthplace Museum, Robert Ingersoll being, of course, a famous figure in the North American free thought movement. His talk here tonight will primarily focus on his new encyclopedia, which he did in collaboration with a number of prominent free thinkers, including, I'm not quite sure how to pronounce this, Richard Dawkins, I don't know, maybe something you've heard of him, I'm not sure. But yeah, I'm sure he'll tell us lots of insights about how he worked with numerous free thinkers and got this remarkable new Encyclopedia of Unbelief together. Aside from, we do have copies of the encyclopedia for sale, again at a discounted price for friends of the center. Currently, I believe we only have 2, but you can prepay, and we should have more copies coming in later tonight when Justin gets back, and of course they will be available for sale at the center. Aside from that, we do have his other books on sale, including Galactic Rapture, The Trouble with Christmas, and Nothing Sacred, so feel free to take advantage of those books, and I'm sure he'd be willing to sign them for you if you wish. Actually, I never asked him, but probably.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. There you go. So let's welcome Tom Flynn.
Justin, you're looking better than ever. What can I say? Actually, I was with Justin this afternoon. I've been going hither and yon, and I've given this talk yesterday at McMaster University and today at the University of Ontario, which I didn't even know there was a University of Ontario, and I guess it's been in existence for, I don't know, 6 or 7 weeks out in Oshawa. You know, they just built one building too many at Durham College, and they had to make a university of it. But I got a chance this afternoon to see Justin at work. He is spectacular in the way he supports student activists who want to get humanist and free thought groups going on their campuses, and the hands-on assistance that he gives them. In this case, the student organizer had been trying doggedly for about over a week to get a modest number of signatures, but there needed to be signatures on a founding petition in order to create an official student group. And, well, Elaine's giggling because she knows where this is going, but the student organizer had just tried and thought everything he could think of, and he just couldn't line up enough people. Well, Justin took him out into the hallway for about 3 minutes and came back with 3 times as many signatures as he needs. I don't know if he hands out money. I don't know how he does this. But this guy can teach just about anybody a thing or two about grassroots organizing, and you're lucky to have him. Well, with that, yes, I've got to say that I have trouble with his name too. He's a promising young man. I think he'll go far someday, and I'm glad we could give him a break by letting him write some of the first stuff in the encyclopedia. Ah well. On to Tales from a New Encyclopedia. In the beginning, I've always wanted to start a talk with those words. In this case, the beginning was 1985. That's when Prometheus Books published the original Encyclopedia of Unbelief. And I imagine they have it in their library collection here. You may have seen it. You may have had occasion to work with it. It was jointly conceived by Gordon Stein, a longtime editor of that little publication, American Rationalist, and Paul Kurtz. It was edited by Gordon Stein. And the original encyclopedia from 1985 was something that had never before existed. A comprehensive reference to unbelief in religion. Its first printing filled 2 fat, tall volumes. Its second printing filled 1 startlingly fat, tall volume. Now there's a reason why it started out as 2 volumes and later went to 1. 1985 was around the time when bookstores first began to go all computerized, and every new book got what was called an ISBN number, a unique code number for that book, and that was tied to a unique barcode, and that's how the cash registers recognized the book. Well, it turned out there was a little problem in the way this system had been put together. It had no way of accounting for 2-volume reference sets. Now, 12-volume encyclopedia, sure, no problem. 4-volume encyclopedia, no problem. 2 volumes, cash registers don't understand it. And it wasn't just the Encyclopedia of Unbelief, it was pretty much every new 2-volume reference work that came out during that period. Very quickly discovered that all you had to do to make a little extra money was to go to your friendly neighborhood bookstore, buy the 2-volume reference work, wait a few days in hopes of drawing another clerk, bring 1 volume back for a full refund, which you would get. Wait a few more days, bring back the other volume for a full refund, which you would get. And that's why in the second printing, the Encyclopedia of Unbelief went into 1 rather unwieldy to handle volume, which is a tradition that we've continued with the new encyclopedia, because after all these years, they still haven't fixed this bug in the inventory management system for bookstores. Go figure. Well, and this is only the beginning of the arcane publishing things that nobody ever wants to hear about that I'm going to share with you today. Well, Gordon Stein was his generation's foremost historian and bibliographer and literary collector in the fields of atheism, agnosticism, free thought, and related domains. He was the perfect choice to edit the original encyclopedia, which immediately became the field's standard reference. Well, fast forward to 2002. Now in 2002, Paul Kurtz conceived the idea that it was time to do another Encyclopedia of Unbelief. Now that was 6 long years ago, and I no longer recall whether I drew the short straw or whether I neglected to duck. Either way, as something of a self-taught historian of the movement, the honor of editing the new volume fell to me. And lo and behold, by an amazing coincidence, here it is. Now I suppose I should pause for a confession. I am one of those of and for whom the new Encyclopedia of Unbelief was compiled. Yes, I'm an atheist, an agnostic, a secular humanist, an unbeliever. I'm one of those much maligned folk who accept that this life is all there is, that the blind interaction of matter and energy is enough to account for all we know and all we are. And I believe anyone can live a full, meaningful, and even exuberant life without religion, without any kind of supernatural or spiritual belief. Not even undertaking the new Encyclopedia project could shake my optimism. Hey, I said I live without religion. I never said I was sane. So one bright day in 2002, I fired up some project planning software. The kind of software a contractor might use to schedule the erection of a bridge or an office building. And I concluded with a high degree of confidence that the new encyclopedia would be done by March 2004. Now I've got to be honest, we came close. If you call November 2007 close, we came close. Long ago, a wise person said, "Nothing ever gets finished on time or under budget." I think it might have been one of the pharaohs. And hence, the new Encyclopedia of Unbelief turned out to be 5 years in the making. I hope the result will be worth the wait, and I hope to have given our field and our movement a new standard reference work. Now, running late has its benefits. In 2004, there was no CFI Ontario, and I probably would have been standing up here giving this lecture to some very, very puzzled circus people. Also, if it had come out on schedule, it would have emerged into a world where no one much outside of our own movement really paid attention to new free thought works. And we had some concerns at the time as to how many libraries and other institutions would be eager to buy a new hard copy encyclopedia on this topic, at a time when so many were straining their budgets to acquire electronic media. Of course, since 2004, Sam Harris and Daniel Dennett and Richard Dawkins and Victor Stenger and most recently Christopher Hitchens have published major bestsellers critical of religion. So, because we had the great foresight to run 3 years late, the new encyclopedia has a much better chance of attracting mainstream attention, and a substantial number of libraries will probably wish to purchase it. Now, I wish I could say we planned it that way. And if I said that, it would be your jobs to unbelieve it. Actually, there were good reasons for the delay. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. From recruiting the editorial advisory board to commissioning the articles, right through to production and proofreading, at every step, this mammoth project took longer than anticipated. It also took longer than expected for some of our illustrious contributors to complete the articles they'd committed to write. One prestigious contributor, whom I will not name, had agreed to write 2 important and lengthy articles. His deadline came and went, and some very important developments occurred. He stopped answering my phone calls. His email started bouncing. Eventually, it developed that people at his former university, I hadn't realized it was his former university, no longer knew how to get in touch with him. Now, I've got to admit, after a year of this, I was beginning to worry. Then one day, my wife and I were shopping for art glass tchotchkes in Corning, New York, which, let me tell you, is one of the very best places south of the border to shop for art glass tchotchkes. They sell little art glass pieces everywhere. And there was the mystery contributor and a companion coming toward us on the sidewalk. Fortunately, by the time he noticed us, there was no room to run. A due respect for civil decorum forbids me to say what happened next. But the long-awaited articles came in about 6 months later. They were breathtakingly good. And as Monty Python always liked to say, there was rejoicing throughout the land. There was another contributor, whom I also will not name, who agreed to write more than a score of entries and produced nothing for almost a year past his deadline. Nor did he respond to emails and phone calls. The difference was the people at the university where he worked still said he was putting in appearances. Now, sometimes an encyclopedia editor has to think outside the box. I finally induced this tardy contributor to start churning out what turned out to be a series of excellent entries by calling a florist and sending a lavish funeral arrangement to the academic department where he worked. Coming to work and discovering that your colleagues think you just died has a way of making a person think about what really matters in life, like finishing your new encyclopedia articles. Well, there's another contributor whose name I will reveal, Vern Bullough, one of the nation's leading sexologists and historians, a longtime humanist activist, and an associate editor of Free Inquiry magazine since its formation. Vern quite simply knew all there was to know about sex. Is everybody paying attention? And about the ways religious and social conservatives had sought to curtail frank conversation about sex or serious research into it for centuries. He was also a leading authority on the 19th century free love movement, the persecution of publishers who disseminated information about birth control techniques, and similar subjects. Finally, he was an expert on the history of the humanist movement. And while we didn't tap this aspect of his experience for the new encyclopedia, I can't resist pointing out that Vern Bullough was probably North America's leading cultural anthropologist of prostitutes. Vern and his first wife were a team, about the only married couple I ever knew where you might go to their house and hear, "Okay, honey, I have to go look for some prostitutes." "Oh, can I come with? Should I bring the tape recorder?" Well, I know of only one other contributor who took on more articles. And if memory serves, Vern must have shouldered, at least 30 of them, which he wrote at a steady clip over a span of about a year. Then, sad to say, he revealed that he had cancer. It was already rather far along. By the time I had finished editing his many articles, Vern Bullough had died. Now, much could be said about this remarkable person, and much was said and written in a memorial feature in Free Inquiry a couple of years ago. Vern's death touched many of us at the center and represented a seismic shift in several of his fields of expertise. But sometimes when you're editing an encyclopedia, you don't get to focus on those big philosophical issues. You have to get nitty-gritty, like, who was going to review my edits of Vern's 30-odd articles spanning half a dozen domains of knowledge, if nothing else to make sure that in the course of smoothing his copy, I hadn't inadvertently made him say something he hadn't meant to say. Well, fortunately, a few years after his first wife died in 1996, Vern had remarried to a fellow scholar, a wonderful woman named Gwen Brewer. Unlike Vern's first wife, Bonnie, who had been his partner in many of his research efforts, not just chasing prostitutes, and knew his knowledge base almost as well as he did, Gwen was accomplished, but in specialties largely outside Vern's. Nonetheless, she stepped forward and agreed to undertake to correct the proofs. Now, much of this went smoothly, but occasionally chasing down a persistent question would involve her in delving into Vern's bookshelf for his old notes, literally teaching herself enough about his work in an unfamiliar area to be able to respond intelligently to the questions the editing had raised. Well, the new Encyclopedia of Unbelief wouldn't be what it is without Vern Bullough, and Vern's voluminous contributions to the volume wouldn't have been what they are without the determined scholarship and initiative of Gwen Brewer. Well, the new encyclopedia is now out in the world. The reviews are beginning to appear. The American Reference Books Annual online called it a worthwhile purchase for many reference collections. It's a mandatory purchase for academic libraries that serve seminaries or departments of religion. And I plan to take that around to every seminary library I see in here say, here, it's mandatory, pay now. It said so right here. Oddly, the pro-paranormal publication Fortean Times was equally enthusiastic, saying, Tom Flynn has gathered an awe-inspiring roster of performers. This is a fabulous book, almost everything you'll need to know about godlessness. That would go good right here. So here at last is the new encyclopedia. What can we say of it? It's a good doorstop. I haven't tested this, but I've been assured that if you were to put one of these in your toilet tank, you would save water. But I don't recommend that. So what can we say of it? Nearly 600 articles contributed by more than 191 contributors. That's right, 192 contributors. It has 897 pages. And yes, I've complained to Prometheus Books that if they just made the type a fraction larger, it could have been an even 900. I mean, what were they thinking? The contributors include Richard Dawkins, who wrote a couple of entries in addition to the foreword, Christopher Hitchens, Paul Kurtz, Joseph Hoffman, Victor Stenger, Montreal-based philosopher Kai Nielsen, Vern Bullough, as I've mentioned, Ibn Warwick, the American free thought activist Annie Laurie Gaylor, New Zealand-based humanist scholar Bill Cook, Chris DiCarlo, who's now at the University of Ontario Technical, whatever it is there in Oshawa, and happily ensconced, and he knows the name of it. And so that's worked out pretty well, and I have a few entries in there myself. Now, compared to the 1985 edition, there are a couple of important differences, and yes, this is an all-new work. Everything was written fresh for this book. The big thing, those of you who remember the old Encyclopedia of Unbelief, it was red. This is black. Compared to its predecessor, the new encyclopedia relies less heavily on survey articles. We have a lot more biographical entries, and a greater effort was made to place unbelief, in particular 19th century free thought, into a richer context with reference to companion radical social reform movements, including anarchism, socialism, labor reform, feminism and women's suffrage, sex radicalism, and even spiritualism. Yes, in the 19th century, freethinkers and spiritualists were frequently comrades in arms. And if you find that puzzling, I would invite you to read the article on spiritualism and unbelief that'll tell you all about it. Now, I've been told, I don't know if this is true, in fact I'll say that I'm skeptical, but I've been told that people occasionally complain that when I get towards the end of one of my talks, I get way too commercial, just slamming the podium and urging people to buy my books. And I don't want that to be said. So, I'm actually in the middle of my presentation, and I'm going to wax commercial and offensive now. Friends, you need this book. It will retail for a modest $199 US. Now let's see, that comes out to about $199 Canadian. Actually, because of distribution costs, it comes out a bit higher. The retail is actually $225 in Canada. Now that's a frightening price for many individuals, but it's very much in the middle of the pack in terms of what libraries and other institutional users are accustomed to paying for significant reference works. But the good news is, if you want one or more of these books, you don't have to pay $225. I believe we're offering them tonight for $165 for general public and $155 for Friends of the Center. Now, one thing Justin noticed last night, we were giving this presentation up at McMaster University in Hamilton, and we noticed something unusual. People were not buying a large number of new encyclopedias. What they were buying was a surprisingly large number of my 3 older books. And I can only conclude that when you've got a $165 Tom Flynn book staring at you, the $20 Tom Flynn books look like better bargains. We will conduct an experiment this evening later to test that. Well, thank you for bearing with that. If anyone was taking bets on this, well, you can exchange money later, but no, I did not make a blatant plug to sell books at the end of my presentation. Okay, let's wax a little more philosophical. Why a new encyclopedia in the first place? I mean, what need does it fill? Why now? Well, there are several reasons why I believe this work was not just important, but necessary. The 22 years since the original book appeared, 23 now, have seen more than their share of history. There was the fall of communism. On a little more movement-oriented perspective, there was the rise and fall and grisly death of the U.S. atheist activist Madalyn Murray O'Hair. There was the development of a vigorous, academically respected secular humanist movement. And of course, this Center for Inquiry right here is a part of that process. What had happened in history? What had happened as a result of the fall of communism? Well, freed from the threat of the Soviet Empire, Europe became post-Christian, as Canada did to a lesser degree. Meanwhile, south of the border, in what I like to call the evil empire, the United States moved in the opposite direction. And unfortunately, I now live in the only first world society that displays third world levels of public piety. Strident religious expression in U.S. public life became the norm during the 90s, yet at the same time, the number of Americans who told pollsters and social scientists that they reject any formal religious affiliation more than doubled. So even as the religious right was tightening its control on the levers of society, the ranks of the unbelievers were growing. Now, during these same years, Christianity and Hinduism and Judaism and Islam all began to exhibit a disturbing trend. In areas where religious practice was expanding around the world, the type of religious practice that expanded most rapidly tended to be socially and doctrinally conservative and theologically literalistic. Often that expansion on the religious right in all of these religious traditions occurred at the expense of more sophisticated, theologically moderate outlooks. It was as though in all four traditions, a great age of secular liberalism was drawing to a close. And in fact, the odds are greater today than at any time in nearly a century that a randomly chosen religious believer will be a literalist, if not an outright fundamentalist, within whatever tradition he or she inhabits. Well, if the religious environment has changed so radically, then irreligion, too, deserves fresh scrutiny. So those are some of the reasons why a new encyclopedia seemed needed. But why call this volume, or for that matter its predecessor, an encyclopedia of unbelief? Isn't that a kludgy word? It's a question I heard often, and it's one that Gordon Stein addressed in the introduction to his 1985 encyclopedia. Quoting now, "In the English language, unbelief can be said to mean not holding orthodox beliefs or traditional opinions on religious matters in our context. This is the history of heresy, blasphemy, rejection of belief, atheism, agnosticism, humanism, and rationalism. In many respects, it is also the history of the intellectual progress of the human race." Well, in a movement with a rich and sometimes contentious sectarian history, unbelief is one of the few labels that no major faction has ever claimed. So for that reason, one hopes it can be equally inclusive toward atheists and agnostics, deists and freethinkers, religious humanists and secular humanists, ethical culturists and infidels. Now, the appearance of a work like this suggests one additional question, and it's a biggie. Is unbelief important? Do atheism and humanism and skepticism and free thought really matter? I think they do. Now, many Americans and not a few Canadians might disagree. They would object that religiosity seems pervasive